He was an incredible parent and is an incredible parent, but I think I appreciate it much more today as a parent of 3 young children. I think when I was a teenager, I thought parenting just is something that happens, and now I realize how much work goes into raising kids with a sense of purpose and work ethic, and raising them to be close to one another. And obviously to stay close to their parents. So I'm very grateful for him and my mother, and all that they did for us as children, and all that they continue to do for us today. But he was the same type of parent as we see generally. He was funny, sometimes wickedly so. Great sense of humor. He was demanding of us. He had very high expectations for us. Because he knew what we had the potential to accomplish, and he saw the potential in us before we saw it in ourselves, and I think really encouraged us to pursue our passions. He wanted us to find meaning and purpose in our lives, but was very careful not to push us into real estate. So I think that's partially because his excitement, his passion for real estate and everything that he brought home. And so I think we inherited a little bit of that excitement, and perhaps it's in the blood, but he always said to us, you have to do what you love. You'll never be able to compete at the highest level if you don't deeply love what it is that you do, if you don't want to get out of bed every morning and do what it is that you're doing. And he firmly believes that. It's probably the most consistent piece of advice he gave me my whole life. So he would periodically check in with me and almost undermine my thought process about coming into the family business, because he wanted to make sure that I knew that it wasn't an expectation of his. No, he was different. He was not really the type of, he wasn't long on diaper changing and things like that, but I think maybe he was a little bit more traditional in that regard, but he was very accessible and very available. And I think one of the things that I think about so often is that I never questioned that my siblings and I were his top priority. He never allowed us to. He never allowed us to question, because he always made us his top priority. So it doesn't mean he was home every night for dinner. He wasn't. He was working very hard. He was building an enormous business, and he was in the early days of doing that when I was young, and had a lot to prove to himself and to others. And he had big ambitions for himself. So, he wasn't always physically present, but he was always available. So actually, as a little girl, a friend of mine reminded me about this recently, that she used to hang out with me in a janitor's closet where there was a payphone at school, and on recess, I'd go there and I'd call collect to his office. I was probably 10 years old, and I'd call collect to the Trump Organization, which is hilarious. That
you'd say, "Hi, this is Ivanka."
Calling collect from the Chapin School, and he would pick up the phone every single time, and he'd put me on speakerphone. It wouldn't be a long conversation. He'd introduce me to whoever was in his office, but only in retrospect, I laugh now that it didn't matter who was there. It was colleagues, it was titans of industry, it was heads of countries. He'd always take my call. And he'd always tell everyone in the room how great a daughter I was, and say cute things, and ask me about a test I took. But I think that's really telling of him as a person and a parent. We always came first. I was too smart to bring home a date or a boyfriend. I think I brought home my husband. That's it. So he was not my husband when I brought him home, but I was not going to subject boyfriends to the scrutiny of my father or mother, for that matter, unless I was 100% sure.
And let me move on.
Well, you would, my conversations with my father are really between us, but obviously I'm his child, and I'm also been his colleague. I've worked alongside of him for the past decade here at the Trump Organization, and part of the reason we have such a good relationship is because he respects me, and because I'm candid in my opinions, and I share them, solicited or otherwise. So once in a while he'll say things, and I'll tell him he could probably do with ratcheting it back.
And he listens.
Sometimes, and sometimes he doesn't, or sometimes he listens for limited periods of times.
But you can tell him.
Look, I think it's part of what people love about him. It's also part of what angers people. He is authentic. You know, nobody tells him who to be. He is himself. He is his own man. He listens to the opinions of others. He respects the opinions of others. He processes the advice people give him, but ultimately he makes his own decisions. Others always elicited strong opinions in people. He's bold, he's unabashed, he's very himself. And I think for me, you know, the ultimate, the most important thing is I know the man. So when I hear things that are factually inaccurate, it's sometimes hurtful. I feel that as a daughter, but I still know the man. I as a woman, I as a person, could never support someone who was sexist or racist. I just couldn't. I would not be able to be okay with that. But I know who he is as a human being, and I know those things are not true. And not many people say those things, but when they do, it's easier for me to dismiss it because of that fact.